Welcome, everyone. I'm excited today to be joined by Lisa Bryant. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, director, and executive producer behind some of the most powerful true crime series of our time, including Giuffre, Epstein, Filthy Rich. Her work has earned Critics' Choice and Emmy honors, but more importantly, it's given voice to survivors and forced national conversations about justice. She joins us now to talk about the latest twists in the Epstein saga, including Maxwell's continued role, new DOJ actions, and the emotional toll this takes on survivors who've already endured so much. Lisa, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Yes, it's the nightmare that never ends, really.
So can you do me a favor and really just start at the beginning? Because, look, some people are very familiar with this. Some people haven't been paying attention. Some people might be learning this for the first time. You spent more time than just about anyone documenting this story. And it's reemerged in the media, I guess, since that memo dropped, surprising everybody from Axios that, hey, there's no more investigation. Everyone's like, what? What do you make of the timing of that release of the memo? And how does that kind of bring everything full circle from what you've done to learning that sort of the investigation seemed like it was ending? Can you just take us up to speed on how we got here?
Well, I began working on this. There's actually people that, thank you for giving me a little credit, but I'd like to shout out to Julie Brown, who's working on it before I was, and others have followed him over the years. But yes, I've been working on the documentary since 2018, and actually I started that before Giuffre Epstein was arrested and then of course died. So the timing now to me is like, why now? Why now? This has been going on for so long. The cover up really began back in 2006, 7, and 8 when he was first arrested. That's when the real cover up and the outrage really should have happened. People just didn't seem to care. They didn't believe the women. He was a rich Palm Beach guy. So I'm outraged. And that was kind of the purpose of Giuffre Epstein, Filthy Rich, is to let the general public kind of know how that happened, that sweetheart deal. Why in the world, we still don't really know why in the world Alex Acosta signed off on this plea deal that is now, Ghislaine Maxwell is trying to use in her appeals to the Supreme Court. But anyway, it is kind of outrageous. It makes me angry that now all of a sudden people care. It's become a political mess. It's not about the victims, the survivors, what they've been through, all of the trauma, about justice. It's about covering, political butts and famous people and the abuse of power. So it's very frustrating. And I feel, terrible for all of the women who've, been traumatized and re-traumatized so many times.
So much of this conversation about Epstein has been about conspiracy and cover up and whether Epstein committed suicide or where's the missing tapes or what documents exist. So much have been about controversy. You focused a lot on the survivors. Mm-hmm. And that's an important angle, I think, because I think regardless of the way people feel about the Epstein situation, whether they want to move on, whether they want documents released, whether they think it's a cover up, whether they're not paying attention to it at all. Yeah. The survivors, I think, universally are the group of people that I think all of us, everybody should at least agree, deserve the most sort of care and attention at this time. And that's been a focus of your work. What emotional impact do you think all of this reemerging with Maxwell and Epstein and everything that's been in the news has on some of these survivors?
Well, I stay in touch with a lot of the ones that were featured in both the documentaries that I did, first the Giuffre Epstein one, and then the Maxwell Filthy Rich, which focused on her criminal trial, where she was convicted and is fighting now to get out and may get a pardon, actually, which is shocking, or, commutation of her sentence. But the victims that I speak with and have spoken with recently, they're devastated. They feel violated, re-victimized again. they really are suffering from betrayal trauma. It's like the very people, the government that's supposed to protect them, betrayed them again. I mean, they've been betrayed over and over and over. They're not ever given the opportunity to heal, in private, really. Everywhere they look, there's Epstein's face, there's Maxwell, it's on the news, it's on TikTok, it's everywhere. And it's, how is this justice? They don't see how this is justice. Conversations aren't revolving around them and what happened to them. It's, around Donald Trump and around politics and Bill Clinton and what other big names there might be. And yes, we've all wanted to, publicly out, some of these bad men, but it's very difficult. And sex trafficking is a very complex, dangerous thing, especially when you're talking about people in power who have been participants, and are very litigious and threatening, girls and, who are, in their teens and early 20s at the time. So this is very, very difficult for them. And, it's just opening a wound, and they've worked so hard and gone through so much therapy that it's just almost, it's 2 steps forward, 4 steps back about every 5 years, really.
Are there survivors from the ones you spoke with hopeful that maybe justice might be served now that the considering the news and the fact that everybody's talking about this again, or are they really just feeling frustrated and fatigued?
Well, most victims don't think there will be accountability for the perpetrators who did this. They think there might be an escape for someone like Donald Trump, if he were, in fact, we do understand he's named in the Epstein files or whatever, the cool term is. We know they had a relationship. That's the main goal right now, I think, for the MAGA people, is that they need to clear his name. And if Ghislaine Maxwell can do it, then we're going to do whatever we need to do to make that happen. So I think that's unfortunate. And, maybe, she supposedly told the truth, but we know that her truth is, led to perjury charges.
She's
before.
been convicted of perjury. So, exactly right. So,
right. So it's hard to say. It will be interesting to see. I would love to see the interview. Obviously, Todd Blanche must have videotaped that interview. So it'll be interesting to see that if and when some information does come out from that interview, any names. I do expect there to be some names. They have to release something, right? They have to. I don't know how long it will take. What did Ghislaine say? There has to be something. I need to see the videotape of her saying that. Of course, I need an unedited version. And I think that'll be the problem, that if they do, in fact, release anything, and if they do, in fact, release some videotape, it'll probably be edited, because there's just no way that we're going to get that whole conversation. And that is what, is going to screams nefarious, and something is just not right here. So, I don't know, but I do think that if she is pardoned or gets a immunity of some sort, and her sentence, and she gets out in a couple of years, she gets out in a couple of months, there will be public outrage, not just from the survivors. I think the general public, I think there will be protests. There could be many riots. I think this has reached a level that nobody thought possible and thought it was just going to go away, and it's really just become the White House's worst nightmare. And the survivors.
So much of the conversation has been focused around the fact that not more people have been held accountable, that only Epstein and Maxwell are the people who have been held accountable. And the DOJ has said that, they've released everything they can release. They looked through everything they could look through. They have everything they can have, and there can't be any more prosecutions based on what they have. But now, as you mentioned, Maxwell testified under a limited immunity, and supposedly gave information. I wonder if you heard, if any of the victims, because look, there are still victims, and this is something people have to remember. I mean, there has been some tragedy where victims are no longer available, but there's other victims, and victims can point fingers to who has been responsible in addition to Maxwell and Epstein. Have they been contacted? Oh, go ahead.
They have. There are a lot of depositions, some redacted. I've seen some unredacted versions. Yeah. So I'm aware of some of these names that everybody is dying to get, but I can't say them. I don't have proof other than, that what this victim told me or what this victim told an attorney and
Right.
was in a deposition. Um, so I guess I lost sight of the question there, but
Oh, well, the question was whether they've been contacted by federal authorities recently, and
well,
which
over the
might,
years, most of them have been
but not
contacted, not
recently.
all. Not in light of
Mm,
all of this. What
yeah.
there's no active case going on. Ghislaine's in prison, and they hoped that was at least some form of justice. But if she gets out, where's the justice in that?
Yeah.
I think uh, let's not forget, Ghislaine was not only a groomer, she was a participant as well, and she was convicted of being a participant as well. She touched some of these women sexually inappropriately, so she's a convicted sexual predator, and if she's able to get out just because she rolled over on people that were not even 100% sure she's telling the truth, I guess the question really is, what leverage does she really have, and did she really share, and can the GOJ really prove,
That's an
and are they
interesting.
really going to prove it? You know what I mean? Because we don't know what's going to happen behind closed doors, because we know right now the end game is to make this all go away for the current administration. And Democrats as well need it to kind of go away.
If the DOJ were to offer some sort of deal to Maxwell in exchange for several convictions, because that's where we're at, right? People wanted to see more people convicted, more accountability. If
Yeah.
she, Epstein's not around anymore, unless unless some of the conspiracy theories are correct, he's not around anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so Maxwell is really the last person that can really be a key witness and have information that could hold people accountable. From a victim perspective, if Maxwell
I don't think
was to,
that's necessarily true,
okay,
actually. I think some of these victims who were very in the weeds for a long time, not she's definitely at the top, but there are a lot of other survivors who have really good evidence, and really they have photos. And I do think that they should relook at some of these people that I think have to come initially now from Maxwell. I think, but I do think there are other people that could help put them away. I don't think it's solely up to her.
right, but if she was involved, and I'm not advocating for her to have any deal whatsoever, trust me.
Yeah.
But if they were to offer her something, a shortened sentence,
Mm-hmm.
something,
Mm-hmm.
in exchange to help some of the victims with the evidence
Mm-hmm.
that they have, put more people in jail, would that be an acceptable outcome to the victims, you think, or absolutely not? It doesn't matter if nobody else goes to jail. Maxwell deserves to be in there forever. Like, what is there a range of opinions on
Yeah.
that?
I think it could depend who you ask, but I think they would like to see the best of both worlds there. They definitely feel Maxwell needs to stay in prison, at least a majority of those 20 years. And they do feel that many other people need to be brought to justice. Even people, not just other, people under her pyramid scheme, other female groomers, other, the Johns who were trafficking, trafficked to the victims. There's so many people, the house managers, people that look the other way, had to have known what was going on. There's just no doubt young women are topless, and it just, I think they really want to see her and other people, and they have for a long time. But if she gets out, it's really, even if three or four others, she's the one in many people they feel is worse than Epstein, because she was a woman. She trusted them. She used her posh, look to, charm them and kind of enrapture them and gain their trust. And then, she exploits it. And so I think many of the women I've spoken to really feel that she's worse even than some of the perpetrators, the men that they were forced to have sex with, because it's kind of expected, that's how they kind of felt. And she was worse because she set them up for it.
From a trauma informed perspective, is there anything the DOJ or the media can do differently in handling this situation? Because I mean, I can just imagine the way some of this information is being delivered can harmed some people emotionally. I mean, is there a different approach they could take?
I just think that they feel that it's all about politics and it's not about them. And particularly with Maxwell's trial, there were four young women underage at the time that it happened, who testified. How much courage there was in that? That's totally lost. What about the other people who, helped in the lame prosecution, and there was in 2008, and that sweetheart plea deal happened. But there was more than 30 brave survivors who came forward, and now ever since then, many more have come forward, and spoken out and finally found their voice. But it just feel like it's getting squashed. So I think the conversation, in the news needs to center more around the survivors as well as just the politics, because it just, to them, it leaves a sour taste in their mouth.
I want to focus a little bit more now on Ghislaine Maxwell and her role in all of this, because as you mentioned, like, she's a pretty central figure in a lot of the trauma that a lot of the victims have. And
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping you can share a little bit more about how central Maxwell was to Epstein's operation, not just legally, but like in terms of recruitment, control, grooming, as you mentioned. What kind of a figure was she in this world?
Well, they were partners in crime. They actually at one time in the late 80s, 90s were together, sort of, if you want to call it that, because he was always having affairs, if you will, or having sex. Basically, he needed or 3 orgasms a day, as the story goes, and as she has said, and as many other survivors have repeated that she said. And so she really was the one who was kind of at the top of the pyramid scheme. There's him and her, but there was kind of two stages of it as well. There was like the 90s, where she would drive in a car across the streets of Manhattan, and she'd drive past the private schools and talk to schoolgirls on the street. She would go to different drama schools. He was a patron of the arts. They would try to pluck girls and groom girls, and sometimes they would present as a couple and try to groom the parents. They would look for someone who was in need. So really, he and Maxwell in particular targeted girls that were so vulnerable and needed something. And this is something that most sexual predators do. The first step in the grooming process is spotting that vulnerable victim, someone who's financially disadvantaged or has already some sexual trauma in the past, maybe comes from a broken home. They have an eye for picking out someone who is in need, and then they just exploit that need, and they promise them something. I can help you get that scholarship and go to college. And when you're pairing a teenage girl with a brilliant, narcissist, which both of them really are, their adolescent brain really isn't equipped to handle it or even understand or react to what was happening. And this goes on generally, at least in the 90s. The grooming was longer, a little bit longer of a period of time, most of the time. And so she was essentially feeding him, and she was so in love with him, which is fascinating, that she would do this. Like, who would bring the man that she wanted to marry so desperately, that was never ever going to marry him? She thought that if she did everything he wanted and pleased him, and pleasing him meant getting him 3 young nubiles, as she would call them, a day, to give him a sexual massage, that he was going to then like marry her. I mean, it's just beyond the scope of any, it's just, you can't even wrap your head around it. So that is how central she was. And then you move into the 2000s, and Jeffrey Epstein in Florida, she kind of helps him set up this high school pyramid scheme that is really, I think that's what is so crazy and shocking. It was like an open secret at the West Palm Beach high schools, where kind of started with Ghislaine. She got some younger girls to then start going to the high school. So she recruited the girls, who then recruited girls from high schools. Then the high school girls themselves are recruiting their friends. Hey, for $200, I'm going to take you over to my friend Jeffrey's house, and if we give him a massage, you'll get $200. And then if you bring some other girls, you can get another $200. And it's so shocking. It's almost unbelievable. But these are young girls. Again, they're kind of on the other side of the causeway, the tracks, if you will, and they're crossing over this bridge into like Disneyland, like Oz, and they've never, there's powerful men, pictures of, presidents and things on this man's house. Wow, he must really be important. And also when they're 14, 15, some of them have braces on when they go over there, and they trust this other 15, 16-year-old girl. Most of the time it was a friend. They took their friend up the staircase. It's the same story over and over. And it was just like this train that just kept going for years. I mean, it was crazy, about 5 years. And then the neighbors called the police to, all these young women coming over. That call, I think, first happened in like 2003. So the police chief goes over and stops some of these women who just happened to be above age, like 21 or something. And so they couldn't do anything. And they kind of let it go. Um, Epstein had donated more than $100,000 to the Palm Beach Police Department. He's trying to present himself as an upstanding, important citizen, holds all these business meetings, important scientists he invites over, but yet he's got this underground sex ring going where the girls are recruiting each other. And it just was shocking. One of the survivors that I speak with, who was really portrayed as a bad girl, even though she was 16, somebody brought her. She ended up then bringing people saying, no, you're not going to touch me. She didn't let Epstein touch her, but I will bring you girls, because she had just been, not recently, she had a sexual assault in her life. And she thought, this is my way out of Palm Beach. I need to get out of here. So I need this money. So it's less yucky to me by bringing my friend. And she was really portrayed as kind of this bad girl, but they were all doing that. And it's just amazing that it took so long for that to get out. And it's really, I think that's what's so crazy, because Diddy's story is disgusting and gross. We can all agree. Weinstein this is just next level. You cannot imagine this. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around. And then when you add in the powerful people, and then the girls who are trafficked to the island, most of these high school girls didn't go to the island. It's these other girls. And then after he gets out of jail in 2008, he starts again, but it's a little bit older. He's not walking the line of girls under like 16, 17, but he's 18, 19, 20, taking them to the island, bringing in his fancy friends, and lots of weird stuff went there.
Of all the victims, I think one of the names people seem to recognize more is Virginia Giuffre. You had a personal relationship with her, and we talked a little bit before the interview. Could you talk about her a little bit and
Yeah.
and her legacy?
Well, she was the catalyst to both of their downfalls. I firmly believe that. I think she's the survivor who just would not stop. She would not be quiet when she finally found her voice. And she's the one who, she sued Ghislaine Maxwell actually first. And that's where all the names of Prince Andrew and others who are out there, some not out there yet, in a deposition. This is the deposition where Ghislaine was committed perjury, said she knew nothing about, girls coming to Jeffrey's house, and all these different lies that were then used against her in her trial. But Virginia, her strength, because she was attacked from all ends, all sides of the spectrum, as many victims are. It's your fault. You should have known better. But she just really never gave up, and she didn't care what people thought. She knew it was wrong, and she wasn't going to stop. And her, even though she was one of these, what you'd consider kind of younger high school girls, actually she was even recruited before. She was recruited in 1999 by Ghislaine when she was working for Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. She was kind of treated special by Jeffrey and Ghislaine. A story that I think hasn't been reported that much, it was in our Filthy Rich, but is that she was like the traveling masseuse. They took her on the planes. She went to all of his properties. She was trafficked everywhere. And they, thought Virginia would make the perfect baby. They asked her, according to Virginia, and she's steadfast and said this story many times and never wavered. They wanted her to have their baby, that but she couldn't keep it. They were going to raise it, but and I mean it's just the craziest thing. But she came forward with all these stories of things that they were doing. She spilled all the beans on the island. She talked about seeing President Clinton on the island, said he was a great guy. He was so nice. I had lunch with him, and he's still, dying on his sword that he's never been there. It'll be very interesting to see if his name isn't brought out by Maxwell. But, she also had the goods on a lot of people, but unfortunately, people wanted to tear her down. And, because she is a trauma victim and had been traumatized long before she met Jeffrey Epstein, her story every now and then her memory was just, she might have been 14 instead of 15, or it might have been June instead of July, and people just jumped on anything that wasn't exactly consistent. But you know what? At the whole core of her story, everything was, truthful. And what happened to her was real. And, she really was, she will go down as the one who I think may had the most impact on this case. And every survivor story is so important. But it's very sad that she finally, I think, was so beaten down and had some other personal issues, but going on with the family and an abusive husband, which is very common. That you just, the cycle of abuse is so hard to break. But I was at this memorial for her in Florida, and it was very moving. There were some survivors that flew in from all over to be there, and it was very moving. Her brother was there, and it was very emotional. Yep.
You've interviewed a lot of people, U.S. presidents, death row inmates. This story seems uniquely challenging. And I'm wondering if you could share what the biggest challenge has been as a filmmaker, director, producer, in putting together this documentary.
Well, it was really hard because when we began, Jeffrey Epstein was still alive, and for the first 8 months, he was running free. He was still doing his thing, and we were tracking his plane and staking out his homes and trying not only to get an interview or a shot with him, but to book people to talk about their relationship with him, people that we knew him. And that's talking about survivors, politicians. This is, even, friends, neighbors. And these are people that are in photos with him, multiple photos, who would either hang up, not interested, don't know him. I don't know how he must have photobombed at that party. So it was like he had, it was such a negative. They, knew they didn't want to be associated with him. So it was extremely hard. But little by little, we were able to, through some of the survivors' attorneys, have meetings with some of these survivors and gain their trust. And that was very, very difficult for that reason. And it was heavy stuff because these women, to get them to go on camera, was very difficult. So when we delivered our first, episode, which we deliver a rough cut, and then there's, not a fine cut, and then you do delivery. But anyway, when we delivered our first thing, we had two women. One was in silhouette, like one friend, alleged friend, and like a reporter. It was very, very, very difficult. Then everything changed. He was arrested, and it really did open up, especially for the survivors. A lot of them had NDAs, and they were afraid, they were terrified. But when he was gone, arrested, and then died, a lot more people came forward. There were still a lot of people who didn't want us to talk, but it was very difficult for those reasons. And I think still you can understand why. I didn't know him. My friendship ended with him. He stole my employees from my hotel. All those kinds of comments. So it was a very difficult story, but it was very rewarding to me because I learned so much about the strength of women who have been through so much, and I have the utmost respect for the women who I spoke with. But it was also very fascinating because I spoke with some people who didn't end up going on camera. And one person in particular, she was madly in love with him, thought they, were going to be married, and he saved her life. And so the mind twists that go on with these people and survivors in particular is quite eye-opening. I learned a lot. So it was very rewarding, but yet very challenging and difficult.
What are you going to be working on next? I know you spent a lot of time on this. Are you going to continue to do more on this, or are there other things you're looking at um, in the crime storytelling realm?
Well, there's a number of things there there's so many stories like this, and they all need to be exposed. I do get a lot of people coming to me. I mean, there's Muhammad Al Fayed. I don't know if you know who he is, who was in the Crown. He was Dodi Fayed's father, who Princess Diana. He was a serial abuser. 400 victims came forward. He was the owner of Harrods, this rich billionaire. So that's a story that's happening over in the UK. But so I've been kind of working a little bit on that here in the States because there's a lot of US survivors. But I also do anything that I feel is worthwhile. I want to feel like I'm trying to either get justice for someone, or maybe a wrongful conviction. I like those cases a lot. But I try to do what feels right, that I'm not going to hang my head about.
If people want to follow your work, where do you recommend them going?
Well, I think that they should. First of all, if you haven't seen on Netflix, it's actually, I found this super interesting. Joe Berlinger, who's an acclaimed documentarian, who actually hired me to direct this. He needed a female director, and I had just worked with him on another project. Um, he posted yesterday that Filthy Rich, that came out in 2020, is back in the top 10 on Netflix. I mean, if you haven't seen that, I would watch it. It's a very good overview of how we got to where we are. And then there's Ghislaine Maxwell, Filthy Rich. That was a 4-part series on Epstein, but the Maxwell one is a shorter watch. It's a feature documentary, and it's all about her and her trial, and it really dives into her role specifically, and more deeply. And then I have some different shows on Max and wherever, and there you go. I'm not. I'm lucky and blessed to have worked on this, and I am still kind of working on it a little bit myself right now. But it's definitely much more of a political story, which I don't like politics.
Yeah. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your stories, talking about the survivors and the victims, because I think it's too often that their stories are lost in the news cycle. And so thank you for highlighting that and putting a spotlight on the victims. And thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for giving them consideration and some voice.
Thanks.
Take care.
You too.